Coming up on Arirang News. A massive wildfire breaks out on Tuesday on a mountain in South Korea's eastern coastal city of Gangneung. Most of the fire was brought under control this afternoon with the rain and slowing winds, but it's left more than a dozen casualties, with hundreds of residents forced to flee from their homes. In its latest annual diplomatic report, Japan did not state its pledge to uphold apologies to South Korea over wartime atrocities and even amidst the related phrase. Also, it renews its false claims on South Korea's Dokdo Island. South Korea's central bank has kept its key interest rate steady for the second consecutive time at 3.5%. This as the country faces conflicting factors including high inflation, rising financial uncertainty, and a sluggish economy. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with the latest on the massive wildfires in the east coast city of Gangneung. One person has died and 16 have suffered injuries while hundreds have been forced to evacuate their homes. But some of the main fires in the mountainous areas have been put out thanks in part to the rain this afternoon. Kim Do-yeon leads our coverage tonight.
17 casualties have been reported from the wildfire in the east coast city of Gangneung as of 8 p.m. Tuesday night. One was found dead in his burned-down home, while among the injured were 12 people who had inhaled the smoke. This comes as the main fire was extinguished successfully earlier on Tuesday evening with the help of the heavy afternoon rain. More than 200 fire trucks and 1,400 experts have been deployed to the area to fight the fire. But strong winds and dry weather made it difficult to put out the fire when it first broke out at around 8:30 in the morning. Earlier in the afternoon, the wind was blowing at a maximum instantaneous speed of 25 to 30 meters per second. This would make standing still a challenge and could certainly cause fire to spread. The strong wind has also prevented the use of 6 helicopters. At least 70 buildings, including houses, have been lost to the flames. The fire spread to the northern region as well, affecting over 370 hectares. Around 2 hours after the fire broke out, the Korea Forest Service raised its wildfire response warning to the highest level of 3 and ordered residents in the area to evacuate. A level 3 alarm is issued when a wildfire's expected damage area exceeds 100 hectares or if the fire is estimated to take more than 24 hours to extinguish. Around 300 local residents are staying at Gangneung Arena as well as inside school buildings. President Yoon has called for maximum efforts to put the fire out quickly. The cause of the wildfire is still unknown, but authorities said it's possible a tree fell down due to the strong wind and crashed into a power line. Authorities are hoping to use the rain and completely put out the fire within the day. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In its annual diplomacy report, Japan has not included its previous pledge to uphold apologies to South Korea over wartime atrocities and even amidst the related phrase. And it also renews its false claims on South Korea's Dokdo Island. Seoul's foreign ministry has lodged a strong protest as it comes at a time when the two neighbors are trying to mend ties. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
Last month, the South Korean government announced its plan to compensate the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through a public foundation, instead of through the Japanese firms found guilty by a South Korean court. At the time, Japan's foreign minister said he hoped the solution would help restore ties between the two countries, and said the Japanese government will continue to uphold the apologies it made in the past.
On this occasion, we confirm that the Japanese government continues to uphold the stance on historical recognition made by previous cabinets as a whole, including the joint declaration between Japan and South Korea made in October 1998.
But Japan made no mention of this in its newly published Diplomatic Blue Book, an annual report on the country's foreign policy and activities released by Tokyo's foreign ministry on Tuesday. Regarding the issue of compensating wartime forced labor victims, the report noted that Seoul and Tokyo have been discussing it since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office in May, through diplomatic channels and at the recent summit between the two countries' leaders. The report did not explain the fact that Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi has said the Japanese government will uphold the stance made by previous cabinets, including the joint declaration between South Korea and Japan in 1998. The joint statement in 1998 between former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and former Japanese Prime Minister Keizo Obuchi includes Tokyo's deep remorse and heartfelt apology for causing tremendous damage and suffering to Koreans during its colonial rule. The latest report from Japan also claimed that South Korea has maintained an illegal occupation of Dokdo Island, which they refer to as Takeshima. Japan has been insisting this in its annual diplomatic blue book for 6 years, since 2018. In response, South Korea's foreign ministry called in Naoki Kumagai, the deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy in Seoul, to protest. Also, the ministry spokesperson said in a statement on Tuesday that Japan should immediately retract the unjust sovereignty claim to what is a part of South Korean territory historically, geographically, and under international law. He added Japan should be aware that repeating such claims does not contribute to the building of a future-oriented relationship between Seoul and Tokyo. 태은지, Arirang News.
South Korea has shared deep regret as North Korea remains unresponsive for the 5th day in a row to routine cross-border communication via the liaison channel and the military hotline. In a televised statement on Tuesday, Seoul's Unification Minister Kwon Young-se found fault with Pyongyang for its unilateral and irresponsible action, adding that it would only serve to further isolate the regime. Kwon also condemned North Korea's use of South Korean facilities at the now closed Kaesong Industrial Complex, underscoring the infringement of property rights as agreed under the broader joint accord over the complex. Seoul's top office says much of the leaked U.S. document was fake and that Washington is eye-to-eye on the matter. It also ruled out the possibility of Washington wiretapping Seoul's intelligence and claims that such suspicions are damaging to national interests. Oh Soo-young reports from Seoul's presidential office.
South Korea's top office has dismissed concerns that the United States has been wiretapping the country's national security office, calling such suspicions absurd and harmful to national interest. On Tuesday, a presidential official said eavesdropping or wiretapping of internal conversations is impossible here at the top office in Yongsan, saying that a highly stringent security system was put in place when relocating from the Blue House last year. In fact, as the president and his officials now share the same building, his aides are under the same level of security compared to the Blue House where they worked in different spaces. He said the opposition party's claim that security was compromised by the move was an act of self-harm that rattles the South Korea-US alliance amid threats from North Korea. This comes after classified documents seemingly leaked from the Pentagon were reported in US media, which appeared to contain conversations between South Korean national security officials. The intelligence leak has stirred controversy over whether the US is wiretapping its allies and comes just over 2 weeks before Yoon's summit with Joe Biden in Washington, D.C. Seoul has maintained that the reports are unconfirmed, with many parts looking fabricated. Presidential officials reiterated Tuesday that verification of the details should be prioritized, and serious discussions can ensue upon the results of the US Department of Justice's probe into the leakage.
Obviously, there's a red line. Every state has them. It accepts, spying and espionage, even from friends and allies, up to a certain point. But at some point, there's a sort of, unspoken code of conduct or an unspoken set of rules that states are supposed to follow. And I think South Korea, will want to reiterate that to the United States.
First Deputy Director of the National Security Office, Kim Tae-ho, told reporters on Tuesday that Seoul and Washington agree there has been tampering of details in the documents, and the leak cannot be a variable in bilateral relations. He said that since the two allies are closely engaged in information sharing, the situation can be an opportunity to solidify trust and strengthen the cooperation system between the two countries. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Facing conflicting factors including high inflation and a sluggish economy, South Korea's central bank freezes its key rate for the second time in a row at 3.5%. Now the rate gap between U.S. stays at 1.5 percentage points. Our finance correspondent Lee Dae-yeon has what this means.
The Bank of Korea has decided to freeze the key interest rate for now. The central bank announced the decision during Tuesday's Monetary Policy Committee meeting, keeping the base interest rate at 3.5%.
Considering inflation forecasts above the target level and financial risks expanding in major countries, we've decided to freeze the base rate and closely monitor the inflation slowdown and other economic uncertainties.
This is the second time in a row that the central bank has decided to keep the rate unchanged with a 3.5% base rate in place for almost 3 months. Analysts say stabilizing consumer prices in South Korea was the main contributing factor behind the decision to freeze rates. The Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 4.2% on year in March, marking the slowest annual rise since March 2022. Worsening economic indicators, too, are mentioned as among the reasons for the central bank's decision. The country's GDP growth rate shrunk by 0.4% in the fourth quarter of last year, mainly due to sluggish exports. The central bank, meanwhile, expected the country's GDP growth for this year to be slightly below the recent forecast of 1.6%. The balance of trade also recorded a deficit during the first 2 months of 2023, in the red for 2 consecutive months for the first time in 11 years. The global economic crisis caused by the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and the liquidity crisis of Credit Suisse were also considered factors that stopped the BOK from imposing a rate hike. With the central bank's decision to hold the rate, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. stays at 1.5 percentage points. The last time the gap was so wide was 22 years ago.
This can spark concerns about foreign capital outflow, but the market sees a rate difference of 1.5 to 1.75 to be safe, as investors not only consider base rates but other factors. Now the government should think of more ways to respond to the strong dollar amid continuing trade deficits.
Although the market widely expects that this freeze indicates the end of rate hikes, the Bank of Korea says it's too early to determine the chance of rate cuts, leaving the possibility of more rate hikes in the near future. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
The South Korean economy is expected to see sluggish growth this year, with the nation's trade deficit already coming to around 54% of last year's record high. Lee Soo-jin has more.
The South Korean economy is expected to see limited growth this year. The Bank of Korea said on Tuesday that the nation's economic growth is expected to fall below February's projection of 1.6% this year. This comes as exports remain sluggish as the IT sector continues to underperform. Exports plunged more than 13% on year to $55.1 billion last month. The country's current account recorded a deficit of $520 million in February as exports shrank and imports rose. The downward trend is expected to continue this month as well. Data from the Korea Customs Service show that the nation's trade deficit has already reached more than $25 billion this year, which is 54.1% of last year's record high. Exports dropped almost 9% on year to $14 billion in the first 10 days of April, continuing the downward trend that began in October last year. Meanwhile, growth in facility investment came to just 0.2% in February as demand for IT parts remained low. Production was also hit hard by the slowdown in the IT sector. The manufacturing sector saw production fall more than 3% from the previous month. Production in the service sector, such as restaurants and hotels, however, rose 0.7% as more people began to dine out and travel. Retail sales, a key gauge of consumer demand, were also up 5.3% on month in February. Economic growth is likely to show a limited improvement during the latter half of the year, however, due to uncertainties related to China's reopening, the IT sector, and global bank crises. Major countries are experiencing a slow economic recovery as well. While the United States and the Eurozone showed signs of improvement at the beginning of the year, downward pressure on the economy rose in March due to the global banking crisis. Exports in China remain sluggish, although domestic demand is on the path to recovery with the normalization of economic activity, while Japan's economic recovery is weak as overseas demand continues to slow. 이수진, Arirang News.
President Yoon says South Korea will invest in electric vehicles to raise production capacity fivefold by the year 2030. Attending the groundbreaking ceremony of Kia's new EV plant at Autoland Hwaseong in Gyeonggi-do Province, President Yoon also said he wants to put South Korea in the top 3 for future cars through aggressive support for R&D and tax cuts. The new plant is the first one to be built just for EVs. He took a look at the prototypes of new vehicles, such as the purpose-built vehicle, a name for customized cars. This includes features such as a front passenger area turned into a seat designed for pets. Meanwhile, according to the presidential office, one of the engineers said there has been rise in demand for EVs, but there are still not enough charging stations, and the president replied that he'll be looking into the situation. Things are looking up for the nation's battery industry, with the United States seeking greater production of electric vehicles. The Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S. is due to release a set of plans on Wednesday local time to limit carbon emissions, where 67% of new passenger vehicles produced in the country by the year 2032 are all electric. This is likely to lead to greater demand for batteries. South Korean companies dominating the market are expected to benefit. According to SNE Research, LG Energy Solution, SK On, and Samsung SDI had more than a 46% combined market share in January and February this year. The third launch of South Korea's first homegrown rocket, Nuri, has been set to be on May 24th. Seoul's Science Ministry said on Tuesday that the launch will take place at around 6:24 p.m. from the NATO Space Center in Goheung. In case of weather or other reasons that may delay the launch, the reserved timeline for the launch is from May 25th to 31st. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute, which leads the Nuri project, had initially proposed a launch date in early May, but the schedule has been delayed due to the late delivery of satellites that are to be loaded onto Nuri for the mission. Nuri will be carrying 8 satellites. One of them will be next-generation small satellite, and the rest will be cubes. This will be the first time Nuri will be carrying satellites that will be put into use. U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday signed legislation to end the national emergency for COVID-19. The White House says that the bipartisan congressional resolution will not affect the end of the separate public health emergency scheduled for May 11th. The national emergency allowed the government to take steps to respond to COVID-19 and support the country's economic, health, and welfare systems. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 1 million people in the U.S. have died from COVID-19 over the past 3 years. Former President Donald Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary first declared a public health emergency on January 31st, 2020, and Mr. Trump declared the COVID-19 pandemic a national emergency that March. The emergencies have been repeatedly extended by Mr. Biden since he took office in January 2021. Jikji, the world's oldest extant book printed with movable metal typeface during Korea's Goryeo Kingdom in the 14th century, will be available to the public viewing in Paris starting tomorrow. The exhibition will run for 3 months. 신세벽 reports.
Korea's Jikji Simcheyo절, the world's oldest surviving book made by movable metal print, will be shown to the public in France for the first time in half a century. Starting Wednesday, April 12th, the Jikji will go on display at the National Library of France as part of an exhibition on the history of printing. The last time the book was available for public viewing was exactly 50 years ago in 1973. The Jikji is about the teachings of the great Buddhist priests. The book was printed at Heungdeok Temple in Cheongju in 1377 during the Goryeo Kingdom. That was 78 years before the Gutenberg Bible, the earliest substantial book printed using metal type in Europe. In 2001, the Jikji was formally added to UNESCO's Memory of the World. Jikji originally consisted of 2 volumes, but only one copy of the second volume currently exists. The book was initially acquired by the first French minister to Korea in the 19th century. It was put up for auction in Paris in 1911 and then donated to the National Library of France in 1952. Ever since, it has been kept in the library storage. During the exhibition, the Gutenberg Bible and the Bois Protat, 2 of the other oldest printings in the world, will also be presented together. The exhibition will run for 3 months until July 16th. 신세벽, 아리랑 뉴스.
And today, that is April 11th, Korea marks its 104th anniversary of the founding of the Korean Provisional Government. A commemorative event was held at Seoul Independence Park here in Seoul. Some 400 people took part, including the families of independence fighters. The Korean Provisional Government was formed in April 1919, shortly after March 1st movement and its related protests. The provisional body played a key role in Korea's independence movement against Japanese colonial rule until the country's liberation 27 years later. More relevant information can be found in the metaverse via a platform recently unveiled by the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs. The platform is called Yoon and can be accessed from the National Memorial of the Korean Provisional Government website. Fountains along Seoul's Hangang River will light up the capital city with colors and music after sunset. According to the Seoul Metropolitan Government, the Banpo Bridge Rainbow Fountain and the Yeouido Park Floating Fountain have been in operation since April 1st. But 8 more fountains spanning the river, including one at Nanji Hangang Park, are also set to join the nocturnal lighting event starting in May. And 2 more, including Dukseom Park Water Screen, will open in July. For more information on the locations and operating hours for the fountains, visit the Seoul Hangang Park headquarters website.
The rain system will be moving out of the peninsula overnight, and clear skies are back in the forecast tomorrow. But do expect big contrast in daily temperatures of 10 degrees or more. For places like Jeonju and Cheollwon, drastic fluctuations will be seen. It's much easier to catch a cold under such conditions, so please take extra care of your health. And air quality won't be so good tomorrow. The combination of strong winds and warm daytime temperatures will trigger a greater influx of fine dust from overseas. The entire nation will be seeing poor air quality. Central regions in particular will see higher concentrations of fine dust. For the Seoul metropolitan area, Gangneung and Chungcheongdo provinces, air quality will be standing in the very bad category. Make sure to have a mask that can filter out the dust particles, such as a KF94. Sunny spells will dominate nationwide. Seoul will start off at 5 degrees tomorrow. And daily highs in Seoul will get up to 15 degrees. Gwangju 18, Gyeongju will be fairly warm at 20 degrees. In between Friday and Saturday, another round of nationwide rain is in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest news. Have a good night.
I'm live. 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해줄 수 있는 세션 분들
아무리 봐도 없지. 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.